The brisket has two parts. You have a flat. This is commonly known as where your slices are going to come from. And you have a point. You'll see a divide line. Your flat is up here. This marbling that's here, this is your point right here. This is where, commonly known as burn ends in a barbecue restaurant, that's where they come from, is this section here. It's almost like two pieces of meat. Point, point, flat. I generally peel everything off of the point because there's enough marbling in it. The point is down into the meat. You can see these nice white grains. That point is so marbled, you want to get this fat off of the point. And you're wanting to see that marbling and that grain. The grain of the brisket's important for when you slice it, present it, feed it to your guest. Anytime you slice a brisket, whether it be the flat or the point, after it's cooked, you always want to slice across the grain, never with the grain, always across. If you go with the grain, it's going to be more like a beef jerky texture. A lot of people cook briskets whole. In other words, I would used to cook this brisket just like this in the smoker after it's trimmed. A lot of guys now, especially in comp, will separate it. It's also a good thing to do at home. It speeds up your cooking process because you're not cooking one 20-pound piece of meat. Your rub's not going to stick to fat. You want your rub on meat. And these grains are perfect. That's what you want to see. You want it to be red like this. Once we remove this and this little bit of a silky membrane, that's where you want your rub to go, and that's where you want your injects to go. It takes a good sharp knife. Don't be afraid to put your hand under for support. You're not going to go through an inch of meat. I go in a little more aggressive than some of these cooks. You're shaving off pieces about the thickness of a piece of beef jerky. If you find the part that's stuck, go back under it. You want nice clean edges also. The edge of this brisket right here is kind of a brown look. That's just normal age from the cryovac when it's packed at your grocery store or your butcher. I like to open this up because this is a little more dry. It's going to take in less smoke to where now you have a nice piece of meat that you're going to be able to penetrate with some smoke. When I pick a brisket out at a store, I like to see fat, and the more fat you have, the more marbling you have, the better the brisket's going to be. You don't want a slick red piece of meat like a sirloin. You need this marbling. That's where your flavor, your juices, everything flows from as you're cooking the brisket. Generally, just for the speed up of a process during cook and for more control, I separate now. You can separate this after you cook. I'm going to go ahead today and actually separate this into two pieces before I cook it. And the flat is this top part that I'm peeling off. You're kind of staying in this fat. You want this piece up here to be as thick as possible. Generally, when you're done, you wind up with two pieces. Here's a flat, here's your point. This flat, I'm going to leave it just about like it is because I want the fat on the bottom to protect me from the heat. That fat on the bottom is okay. I generally cook mine with the fat side down. I'm going to go ahead and square this guy up for the way I want my slices. Because with that grain running, we're going to be cutting our slices right here, and you want to cut across that grain. The point, I'm going to come back in. This is the side we peeled earlier when it was whole, before I separated. I'm going to do it very similar to the way I did the flat. I want to peel down till I find some meat, and I want to skin it back just like the other side. A lot of this fat is really tough. It's not the soft fat like we had on the outside. This is more of a hard, crinkly fat, which is not good flavor. This does not render well. So I've got that about where I want it. You can see plainly the grain running off. It's a little thick here. I'm going to square it up more like a steak. Fits in a pan easier, it cooks more evenly. It's hard to cook something that has one big thick end and one thin end. You're going to overcook one and undercook the other. So I try to get it as uniformed as possible. So at the end of this process, we wound up with our point and our flat perfectly trimmed. You can plainly see the grains here and here. So I'm putting an entire pump into each 1-inch segment. And I stagger that segment on my way back. Don't worry about getting too close to the edge of the meat. It will squirt out on you. 1 entire pump in each inch of that brisket. That way you're getting the flavor that you're trying to achieve with the injection that you've made throughout this whole piece of meat. I move straight over to my point, do the exact same thing. I'm running in the 1-inch increments. I can actually see it move the brisket as I'm pumping it in here. You can see the brisket actually move in this grain. Our brisket is set in a nice inject. It's marinated 4 to 6 hours. At this time, I generally put a light coat of your favorite barbecue rub on. I also go ahead and do the point. Throw it on low and slow, or on your Royal Oak lump or briquette charcoal, or throw it on hot and fast. Hot and fast, I generally run around a 300-degree temperature, and it's a 4 to 5 hour cook for these two pieces being in on separate positions on the cooker. If I'm going low and slow, I'm going to go 10 or 12 hours with probably the lump charcoal, and you're going to go 10 to 12 hours with this in the cooker.